Hi everyone, welcome back to Orange County REALTOR Safety Week. I'm Tiffany, and today we're going to bring you a very special Navigating COVID-19, once again gaining insight from attorney Tom Jacobson. If you have a question that comes up during the session, please type it into the Q&A section at the bottom of the screen. And now I'll turn it over to Tom. Tom, can you help us make sense of the governor's reopening plan and how brokers can keep their office safe during this time?
Well, the short answer is no. I don't know if I can make it seem sense because people are still scratching their heads from what happened last week and trying to figure things out. I mean, it was a dramatic week, as everybody knows. We got legislation dealing with landlord-tenant, which we're not going to cover here today. We're going to leave that for others to talk about. And the governor came up with his color-coded system, which interestingly different than many other states, does not involve a green or a go situation. Everything is restricted in this state. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that today and kind of go into it, but I want to make sure everybody understands one very important caveat, and that is we're giving you the best knowledge we have today. We believe things are going to change because, as you will recall, the last time they opened up the salons and nail centers, the governor immediately closed them back down again. And so you have to understand that what we give you today is what we know today, and the governor can basically make this moot very quickly by issuing new directives again. So with that caveat in mind, I'd like to go ahead and start. And I'm not showing that I can put my screen on here. Oh, well, wait a minute. I think we can get this here. Here we go. There it goes. I do have a little PowerPoint that will take us through this here today. So if you will all bear with me a little bit, we will get that up and running, hopefully. There we go. So I want to make sure everybody understands that our focus today is going to be quite limited. It's really protecting the offices that you work in and protecting the people that come into your office, not just agents, but also customers, clients, and employees. So we're really focusing on the office and what you do in the office, as well as talk a little bit about preparing agents to go out and to show property. So this is going to be the scope of our discussion today. So I'm going to try to talk a little bit about the status of the current orders of the governor, talk about Orange County status in particular, and what to think about before opening your offices, monitoring your offices in compliance with the applicable rules and regulations, and how to address some of the issues. And of course, one of the issues I'm sure that's on the back of everyone's mind is what happens if one of my agents, my employees, or someone else who is in the office comes down with what we believe to be COVID-19, and how do you react to that? Because one of the things that I want to stress to office managers and brokers in particular is this is not going to be an inexpensive trek that we're going to take. When you look at the guidelines, which we're going to refer you to, you will find that this is going to involve an investment on your part and pointing somebody in your office basically to be the COVID-19 monitor and some other things which will end up costing you money. And I can't, I think, explain it any better way than that, other than the fact that it's something that you're going to have to prepare for, and it's going to become a new cost of doing business. So what the governor did is he decided that we're going to only have statewide plans on certain things instead of some county special rules with regard to whether or not something qualifies to be open or not. So he divided the state into the various different counties and then put colors to them. Now, as you'll notice, most of the state is in the widespread category, which is called purple. And then there's the substantial, which is in kind of a red. You'll notice very interestingly is that San Diego County and San Francisco County are in a much more relaxed category than Orange County, Los Angeles County, San Bernardino, Riverside County. So if you're doing business in San Diego County, you have an office down there, the rules will be a little different than they will in Orange County. And of course, you can notice that the minimal ones are only in Lake Tahoe and in the very top right-hand corner of California. So as you can see, these are very, very, very tough standards, and they apparently were meant to be. So Orange County, if you look at it, you'll find that Orange County is in the purple area, and that means that we have to structure ourselves, at least as long as we're in the purple area, to deal with that. So there's some things that we have to look at in terms of opening offices and keeping them open. And before reopening an office, all your facilities must comply with these particular rules, which you will find as part of the Cal-OSHA guidelines. And that is, you have to, first of all, perform a detailed risk assessment and create a worksite specific COVID-19 plan as to how you're going to function. So this is something that maybe you haven't done, or if you have done, you ought to look at again. But you have to have this plan, and the plan has to be accessible to any OSHA inspector or any other government law enforcement inspector that comes in and wants to see your plan. And you can get help in preparing this plan two ways. One, CAR has come up with a prevention plan, and Orange County Realtors has a suggested format for this, and you can obtain this from the association. And this will give you kind of a template on which to go on. But you'll see that it is something you'll have to deal with, and we're going to explain a little bit more later about what has to be in your plan. But this gives you a summary of what you have to do just to reopen. Now, you've got to train all your workers, and I use the term workers so they'll include the concept of agents, employees, independent contractors, to the extent anybody knows, can find one left in California after what the Supreme Court did a year ago. If you have any workers there, you have to train them on how to limit the spread of COVID-19, and this includes how to screen themselves for symptoms and when to stay at home. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a minute, because I think it's real important that you have a plan in place that explains to employees that their lifestyle will have a lot to do with whether or not the office remains open and whether the office remains free of any contamination. You need to set up individual control measures and screening so that you can assure yourself and everyone else in the office that you're doing the very best you can not to bring COVID-19 in. And I'm going to pause for a second, because I always get asked the question, am I going to get sued if something goes wrong? As many of you know, we really don't have any definitive case law yet. We have insurance companies running around saying we're not going to cover this. And so it's very, very important that until we do have some case law, you take the most conservative approach possible. And that means that what you need to do is you need to measure up to what the standard of care is going to be in our industry. And you've probably heard that term used before in our seminars, maybe heard it with other legal topics that you have been exposed to, but the standard of care is what the reasonable broker would do in this situation. And that means that you're going to have to follow all of the CDC and OSHA guidelines. So when you're putting together your control measures, you don't want to ignore these things, because this may come back to bite you at a later date. Now, the fourth item is to put disinfection protocols in place, which is everything from having hand sanitizers to requiring that people disinfect common used areas such as copy machines and things like that. And you also need to establish the physical distancing guidelines. And that means that things like putting on the floor, keep 6 feet apart, and placards and things like that to remind people about how to physically distance. And I'm going to go over some issues, I think, that are very specific to offices in a little bit. You have to establish the universal face covering requirements in accordance with public health standards. And that means in California, they really are encouraging the use of a cloth face covering. Now, this isn't your bandit's bandana with one layer, or some kind of a piece of cloth that you just happen to pick up at home. It does need to be able to capture any coughing, to capture any expulsion of droplets and things of that nature. Remember that face masks are not to protect you from somebody else necessarily. They're to protect other people from you. And since none of us know for sure whether we're going to come down with the flu tomorrow, or whether we're going to come down with a cold, or even whether we've been infected with COVID-19 and we're going to come down with COVID-19, it is important that all the people in your office understand that the use of face masks is about the same protocol or the same manners as other things you would do, such as the fact that you don't cough without putting your hand over your mouth, or nowadays putting your mouth into your upper arm or elbow, and certain other things that you don't do in public around other people. And so it is a common courtesy and also looking out for other people that people have to understand they're doing. It's not a matter of I'm not going to catch it. It's a matter of whether you're going to be expelling something into the air that might in fact cause some kind of contamination. And it's not just COVID-19, but also the flu. And as some of you have probably read, there is a controversy that exists in this country right now as to whether or not a lot of the deaths that have been reported are really COVID-19 or whether they are other diseases, including pneumonia and the flu. I'm not here to resolve that issue or resolve that controversy, but please understand that though there is a financial incentive, if you will, and I hate to use that word, for a hospital or other care facility to report that the issue was a COVID-19, it doesn't really matter how somebody dies. If they die because they were exposed to a situation where there was a contaminated workplace. So this is why we have to wear the face coverings, okay? And please try to encourage everyone to do that. The reason you don't see me wearing a face covering is because there is nobody right now within 500 feet of me, and hasn't been all morning. But if I was speaking to you in the auditorium at the Orange County REALTORS, there's a good chance that I probably would be wearing my face covering. I've been flying during the last month, and I've got to tell you, one of the really great things is people are very compliant when they're flying, and you almost feel like that's one of the safer environments as opposed to grocery stores where people are, exercising their so-called First Amendment rights and not using face masks. So you need to make sure that that is part of the protocol in your office. Now, there are some things that I think that you need to be aware of about the workers that come into your office, okay? What do you do before you come to work? Well, first of all, you watch for symptoms. And the symptoms may appear 2 to 14 days after exposure to the virus, as we like to call it. And so these are some of the things that people might experience, and they should be aware of them. Now, it's amazing how many people really aren't aware of the symptoms, but this is something that you should have in your plan, make it aware to your workers as to what they're going to be exposed to. First of all, you can see them. These are very simple things, from fever and cough, fatigue, muscle or body aches, and so on and so forth. But these are not meant to be inclusive lists. So if you say, whoa, I don't have this, so I must not have COVID-19, I just can't breathe. That's the kind of thing that it doesn't matter. Anything that is out of the so-called wellness area is someone who should be checked out and should be addressed, okay? So if people have these symptoms, they should not be coming to work. It used to be that if you got a little sick, you were going to be a hero, and you were going to, take one for the team, and you would come in to work with your 103-degree temperature and your flu, and you'd get your job done. That's not an acceptable norm in 2020. What may have been acceptable in 2000 or before that is not acceptable today. We do not look upon people who come to the office as heroes. We look upon them basically as people spreading a disease and contaminating people. So things have totally changed in that area. So those are some of the things your workers should look at before they come to work. The other thing is they need to understand that they need to wash their hands often. This has proved to be a very successful way of avoiding transmission of the disease. And that means washing your hands at home too, as well as washing your hands in the office. And to avoid close contact with people, unless it's, family, friends, or it's absolutely necessary. And and covering your mouth. We've talked about that. Covers coughs and sneezes, and clean and disinfect not only in the office but in your home, and disinfecting in your transportation, and monitor your health. I wanted to point out that there's some things that I think are really, really important for people to adopt during this pandemic. I'll just give you a scenario. When I was a kid, one of the things we used to do is we used to wash our cars almost every day and shine them up and make sure there wasn't a speck of dirt on the inside of the car. And as you get older, you kind of take the position, well, it's a car, it's transportation, it doesn't have to be perfectly clean. Well, now we're in a situation where if you have people getting in and out of your car, you don't know that it remains clean. And there is a lot of controversy still whether or not surfaces are a transmitter of the disease. So I think it's important to advise your workers that part of having a good work environment is having a good home environment, which includes a clean car. If they take public transportation, be really careful of public transportation, because even though most of the transit companies do an excellent job of cleaning the bus or the train before somebody gets in there, you don't know who's touched that pole just before you did and how long it was. So it's really, really important. And also, one of the other things it's important to impart to these people, I don't mean to make you parents, but to some extent, we really are parenting each other in connection with this, is you really should not be using the same disposable face covering that you used on March 15th on September the 3rd. And also, if you have a cloth face covering, it should be washed regularly. Now, regularly may mean different things for different people. I know that my habit is to wash about every 2 to 3 days. And it's really simple. You put it in the washing machine with everything else, and it gets washed, and that's it. But that's part of it. If you don't have a clean face covering, you're defeating the whole purpose, because you're really self-infecting, and people tend to take these things off and lay them down. So it's real important that we follow this. Now, when people arrive at work, they should be prepared. They may have their temperature taken. Now, I'm not telling all of you that is something that you have to do, is go out and buy one of those thermometers. Most workplaces have been doing it. They're not terribly expensive. The only problem is their availability. But you may want to get a hold of that and use that as kind of a standard, that they have to come with face coverings and other protective tools depending upon what they're doing at work. There are some situations, frankly, where I think gloves have been underrated, and they should be used. If you're handling documents that come in from other offices, any paper that you're taking in, it might be wise to have your people use gloves to handle those documents until you know that those documents, there's no question that those documents are sanitized and safe. So I think you should be using gloves in spite of the fact that they're not being promoted as greatly as they were back in March. And most importantly, tell people they have to wash their hands regularly. When you arrive at work, after you've gotten out of your car, you've touched the front door, and whatever else you might have touched, whoever else you might have come in contact with, have them go to the restroom and wash their hands, and then use some sanitizer, so they at least start out with the things that they will touch in the office of having clean hands. I can't stress this enough, because if for some reason you have come from outside and you have brought in a contaminant, all the other things that we're talking about are going to be very difficult to be successful if you don't start out the day with clean hands. Okay. Now, the prevention plan that we talked about earlier, as I mentioned, you can get a sample plan from CAR and from the association. The things that are in the plan that are very, very important is you have to have a plan for the use of face coverings. You have to identify on this paper, so that people can find it readily, a contact at the local health department. And that's something you will have to have in there. And you'll need to have a go-to person in the office. Now, this go-to person is the person who is going to get stuck with the responsibility of being current on what's going on with office openings and they will need obviously to have certain documents. One of the documents that you should have in your file is called the COVID-19 Employers Playbook. There are two versions that are out there. There is one that is dated July 28th, 2020, and one that's dated July 31, 2020. I strongly suggest that you have your starting point as the July 31. Now, there is information in the July 28th that's very important, but these are OSHA documents, and they're available at the covid19.ca.gov site. And so you should be able to get those very readily for you. Otherwise, you can Google COVID-19 Employer Playbook for a safe reopening, July 31, 2020, okay? And that will help get you started. You need to identify what the work areas are in your office. For instance, you may have warehousing or storage space that people don't go into, and that is an area that you probably don't have to cover in terms of having placards and things of that nature. But most of your work areas, you probably are work areas, and you will need to have that comply with the rules that have been set down by Cal OSHA and others. You need to do an assessment of your office. Now, that assessment includes such things as, well, we have a tight walkway between these I want to call them carousels or little cubicles. And so do we have to have one-way traffic in the office? Now, I have heard from employers so far that is terribly unenforceable. I know that the grocery store that I go to has these one-way aisles, and there are people like me that just can't seem to read because I see something that's, instead of going all the way around to the other end of the store, I see something that's about, 15 feet over. So I push my cart in there. I grab my hot cocoa or my cocoa mix and I put it in there. And of course, I've got other people staring at me because they've been going the right way. It's a very difficult thing to enforce and to get used to. But on the other hand, this is part of what you have to do to try to keep spacing between peoples. So it's part of the assessment that you will be doing. So you have to assess your office for specific issues. You have to have a training prevention plan in place, which will mean training people about what to do with face coverings. You're going to have to go through the whole bit. As again, you can find a lot of help, not only in the CAR model that we've talked about, but also in the other booklet from OSHA that I have recently talked about. So also you have to have a plan for how you're going to show properties. Now, I realized that yesterday, I believe you heard from one of my colleagues, Neil Kalin, about that, and that's been covered by some others. We are not going to necessarily be covering that today because of time constraints. I will only tell you that it's a repeat of what many of you have heard before, which is, first of all, one, people have to go to these properties in their own cars. The second thing is have to be by appointment because that's part of the state law. There has to be an appointment for the showing. The showing agent's going to be responsible for cleaning the property before and after. There has to be a placard up in front of the house no open houses, okay? There's nothing that has come down in the last few weeks that has changed the concept of being able to have a true open house. Be real careful with your agents on that. I know they're going to come to you and they're going to have great ideas because let's face it, you are dealing with a very creative crowd in this industry. They wouldn't be successful if they couldn't be creative to get through these transactions. So they're going to have some great ideas. But the basis of the no open house is that one, you have to have a previous appointment to go show this property before you go and do it. So therefore, meeting people at the property may not do that. And what's going to be the effect? Well, the effect is that if there's a problem or even an alleged problem, say you get sued because somebody said, the seller says that they contacted COVID-19 because of this open house process, or you have two buyers that come back to back and they blame you for doing that, and they say you didn't follow the standard of care of the industry. That is going to be problematic because the standard of care right now is what is being dictated to us by the governor's office and by all of these other guidance items. And one of the things that's clearly problematic is an open house. And the reason I'm emphasizing this is because we are becoming aware of the fact that your E&O coverage and your E&O insurance coverage, the carriers see a very significant potential loss here and have been avoiding any liability that arises out of COVID-19. Now, I only know of 2 situations where anybody has even tried to make a claim so far, and it haven't resulted in a lawsuit. But in turning it over to the carrier has had an extensive letters as to why this is not covered. So that scares me a little bit as someone who is responsible to provide brokers with advice as well as defend them in lawsuits. Is even if the person doesn't have a good cause of action, it's going to cost money to have that lawsuit thrown out of court. So please be real careful about those things. So in the prevention plan, you also want to have individual control measures and screenings, plan for cleaning the office. You know, in quote unquote, the good old days back in February 2020, you had a cleaning service that may have come in 3 times a week. And, you know, they emptied half the trash cans. They did leave something on the floor to, you know, so that they'd have something to pick up the next time they came in. Those days are gone. We have to have good cleaning services that do a good job, that know how to sanitize, that follow the CDC rules and the EPA rules and do what they're supposed to do, okay? And then your prevention plan also needs to have this what if, the worst what if. What if one of your workers or person who frequents your office sustains COVID-19? And we're going to talk a little bit about that in a few minutes, but that's got to be part of your prevention plan. There's one area that I want to touch on because I think that we didn't pay enough attention to this when we first started talking about this issue, and that is the break room protocols. And there isn't an office that doesn't have a kitchen, a break room, or someplace for people to go during their breaks. Usually they have a refrigerator in there, a sink. Some people have facilities to heat stuff up with, you know, everything from a microwave to a big Wolf oven. So everybody has a little something different, but everybody seems to have a break room. So I want to suggest this as a protocol for you, that you adopt this in your plan as for your break room. And that is, first of all, food brought in must be in a container that can be sealed. Now, I'm not promoting any brand or anything, but I've seen a lot of plastic containers and they all have lids and they kind of seal themselves on there and they're sealable. And that is the kind of thing that I'm contemplating when I'm talking about bringing something in a sealed container. I don't think the proverbial lunch bag is a sealed container, even if you want to put a paper clip on it. But use a sealed container. This can be reusable and can be taken home at the end of the day. You see, food should immediately be placed in the refrigerator if you have one. That's where it should be stored. It should not be stored out in the open because food can be obviously a transmitter of a lot of diseases and viruses. So it's very, very important that you keep this food under control. Do not share food. I know that this is office tradition and has been in every industry throughout the entire 20th century and into the 21st century, is you bring in what was left over from the party last week and you put it on the table and you count the seconds to see how long it takes for the donuts to disappear. We can't do that. There should be no showing of food out there, or no sharing of food, and it's unfortunately it's no longer something that can be done. Okay. Next thing is, after somebody has eaten something, they should place any uneaten food either in the trash or back in their own container. Seal it up so food is not left laying around. They should remove the container daily, take it home, clean it thoroughly before reuse. And that's really important so that there's nothing that lingers in there. Now, the other thing is that I'm going to attack is another one of the great American traditions, which is the coffee cup issue. And, who thinks that a coffee cup could cause any kind of an issue? Well, You put your mouth on a coffee cup, and and it can very easily, then something could rub up against it, and then somebody touches it and they put it to their face. So coffee cups, first of all, don't leave them just laying around. Coffee cups should be used to drink the coffee or drink your beverage or your water, and then they should be cleaned out immediately. And they should be cleaned often with hot water and soap, because they're a potential issue for contamination. You should keep your break room clean. And I strongly suggest that you don't make dishes available to people, because there are people like me that believe that the thing you do is that you use a dish, you put your food on it, sometimes you even maybe take the last lick of that fudge from the cake off the plate, and then you put it in the sink, and magically tomorrow it's back up on the shelf somehow. Somebody else cleans it. I think dishes cause a problem because of the fact that unless you've got a dishwasher and you've got a system to absolutely sanitize these things, that it's very, very dangerous to have them. And finally, I'm going to repeat, after you're done eating and after you're getting ready to go to your workspace, wash your hands again. Wash your hands before you go in the break room, wash your hands before you go out. So I think this is something that you ought to seriously consider putting in your protocols. Now, social distancing is the rule, as all of you know. There's a universal 2 meters, 6 foot rule. And so that means there's things that you've got to make sure in your plan, that you have a plan. I would include in your plan that workers are not to exchange handshakes with each other or with clients and customers. There are to be no hugs, no high fives, unless you do we call the contactless high five, if you know how to do that. Don't touch something and toss it to someone else, such as, hey, here's the keys to the restroom. And you toss the keys to the restroom, and the person then takes them from one hand to the other. Also avoid passing each other when walking. Though I think in some offices that's very, very difficult, but understand that close proximity is exactly how this virus is transmitted. One person at a time in a bathroom, unless you have a substantially large bathroom where you can have 2. And most important, if you don't feel well, make sure all your workers understand, don't be a hero, go home, have them tell their supervisor immediately. And they need to understand that there may be benefits available to them, such as sick leave. Now, I want to touch briefly upon this concept of sick leave. As many of you know, there's a requirement in California to provide sick leave to employees. And so in doing such, people have the right, if they don't feel well, to take that sick leave. In addition to that, there is a federal statute that has now been added, which in some cases can allow for additional sick leave. Now, I know that's not the thing that employers like to hear, but the Families First Coronavirus Act, known as the FFCRA, does have some provisions in it for businesses less than 500 employees, or workers as they call them, to get additional sick leave. So one of the things that you may want to do is to consult that law and to see if there's something in there that will require you to give additional sick leave. In addition to that, the coronavirus has been declared by the state of California to be a disability, and so it can qualify for disability benefits if someone gets coronavirus. Now, one of the issues that I have as an attorney is what happens if they can clearly show that the coronavirus was contacted while the person was on vacation or something away from the office. And I don't have a true answer for this. I think this is one of the things you're going to do on a case-by-case basis, but it has been recognized as a disability in California, and probably the way the state is going to look at this is going to err on the side of presuming that it is work-related and prevents work. So again, this is something that I think that all of you should be aware of and deal with. In addition to that, many of you are probably aware that in California, we have the California Family Rights Act that gives somebody 12 weeks of job protected leave, though not with pay. And so anyone who wants to use the leave time without pay can do such under that particular law. So please be aware of that. Now, when people leave work, my suggestion is, again, make sure they wash their hands. Now, if the car was clean when they started and they want to keep it clean on the way home, best thing to do is to wash your hands. Also, I think you need to get people to refrain from taking things from the office to the car or public transportation. And I keep coming back to this, keep everything clean in your life. That means that their homes may need to be something they give some attention to. And I absolutely realize there's no way you're going to start conducting inspections on their home, or they're even going to let you do that. But I think it's something in the culture of doing your training that you stress to people that if they don't have a clean home and they don't have a clean means of transportation, then everything we do for them in the office is not going to help them or their co-workers. And since it's spread to other people, everybody in the office has an interest in the way everybody else lives their life. Now I'll talk a little more about the governor's August 28th orders. You may recall I mentioned that what they did is they divided the counties by colors. The purple color is the most restrictive, and Orange County is in the purple. That means that they don't report more than 7 new cases every day. And this is where we get into this issue of, how long is this going to go on and what does a case constitute? One of the things, of course, that they didn't resolve is what happens if I work at Orange County Realtors and I live in Carlsbad in North San Diego County. Who gets to report my brand new COVID-19 case? And that's not been resolved. And so I can't tell you whether or not the 7 cases are based on where you live or where you work. I would gather that the only way that they are being computed is where you go to the hospital or your care provider. So, but in any event, just to understand what that means, 7 new cases. If someone has a flu or a flu-like symptom, and the hospital or care provider, for whatever reason, says, well, let's initially diagnose this as COVID-19 because we will get more money than if it's just an ordinary flu, you can see how quickly you can reach 7 cases in a week in a county the size of Orange County. The red, of course, is 5 to 7 new cases. Orange is 1 to 3.9 new cases. I wonder what a 0.9 case looks like. And then yellow is less than 1 new case. Let me tell you how difficult it's going to be to get to yellow, just so you understand in running your offices. 1 new case a day is something that they've only achieved in some very, very rural areas. People who don't have contact with a lot of other people and things of that nature. So the chance of us getting to yellow under this system are very slim. So in deciding whether this is a long haul issue or a short haul issue, please understand that yellow looks like it's a long ways away, okay? I can give you some examples of counties outside of Orange County, that have like 5 or 10% of the population who bounce around from 1 to 2 cases a day that are diagnosed. And so that might give you some idea. So what we're in purple means you can provide what's known as essential services. And through the work that CAR, NAR, and others have done, real estate has been classified as an essential service. And that allows then for you to have limited reopening of your businesses. The limited being in that you have to have these plans in effect and you have to practice those plans. So please understand that this limited reopening, and anything you read in the press about how businesses reopen, it's only being reopened for essential services in Orange County, and it's only being reopened in a manner in which you follow the prevention rules set down by Cal OSHA. Okay, so that brings me to the end of what we were going to do for our slide presentation, and I wanted to leave some time, Tiffany, to address questions, since we do have brokers and managers with us, and these are the people that are going to be saddled with this big responsibility.
Thank you, Tom. That was very informative. We do have one question. When and where will the slides be available? I'm going to just also add to that question too. When will the recording be available? The recording should be posted in the next day or so on the website. And I believe Tom addresses the slides within the recording. So you can find it on our website. Other than that, we actually don't have any questions, but we ask those that are attending, what questions do you have? Tom is available right now.
I might add, I'm going to add this again, that whatever guidance we give you today is based on what we have today and what has happened today. I think things are very, very volatile. As I mentioned before, and you're going to have another seminar on it. I mean, what's going to happen in the world of landlord-tenant and, mortgages and things like that is going to be very, very critical. I know that when we talked in March, we were real concerned about the market and well, Chicken Little was wrong again. The sky didn't fall in. But, here again, we have a lot of things going on right now. And I think that that's, real important that you realize what happens every day and not so I went to a seminar 2 months ago and this is what they said. So that people understand, where we're at.
Thank you, Tom. Another thing too is if those brokers or office managers do have a particular situation, I mean, we're providing general information, would you recommend that they consult their own attorney?
Yes, I think the reason I say that you should talk to your attorney and the one, person you're used to dealing with on all your business matters is because I'm really concerned about the standard of care issue. We see the insurance companies running the other way from anything that looks like a COVID-19 claim, whether it's actual infection or whether it's business interruption. And so I think one has to be very concerned whether they're going to have insurance coverage for any of these things. The best way to assure that you're going to have a good case to hand over to your attorney is if you have a file that shows that you put a prevention plan in effect, that you followed all the rules, that you haven't allowed your agents to do cavalier things, such as open houses. And I think that's actually a really important thing is when you sit your people down to train them, I don't care if they're the top producer. Remember, top producers can get you into a lot of trouble too. You need to make sure they understand that this office policy is you follow these rules or you're gone because you're not going to expose all of us to one disease and the second to unknown liability. And they, even when they leave the office, they will take the liability potentially with them if they were careless in the manner in which they did any of these things. So I think it's real important that, when you sit down with your folks, that you make sure that they understand this is not just some crazy thing that somebody's come up with and we just have to kind of go through this, but it's something we have to actually implement and we have to understand where we are in connection with potential liability from all of this.
Thank you, Tom. We have another question. How do you feel? Sure. How do you feel about getting everyone tested before getting back to the office because of the potential for those that are asymptomatic?
Well, if anybody's had the test, it's not pleasant, okay? And so when you ask me, well, would it be a good idea? If I hadn't had the test, I'd probably say, well, yeah, as an attorney, of course, it'd be good, but it's only good for that time when the test was taken. 5 minutes later, it's not any good. So I don't know that it's imperative to have the test. It only gives you small results. I do think that what's really important is the so-called self-assessment. So by way of example, if you went to a party last Saturday and the party was a wear no mask party, nobody wore any mask, and there was this guy, Tom Jacobson, running around going, coughing and saying, well, I'm just not quite up to myself today. I think I got a small fever, I got a cough, and I ache. I think that's kind of the situation. I go, whoa, it sounds to me like you probably were exposed to something, and we probably would want you to go get tested. Why don't you go do all of us a favor, go down and get tested. And if it's a cost, we'll pay for it. But, it sounds to me like you may have been in a bad situation. So the self-assessment can also be, there are many folks who just, they're not social. They're with their families, the same people all the time. I think that's a completely different situation. So those are the extremes. And we do know that there are some people that are, doing all kinds of things. I think all of you have seen things like going to soccer fields and stuff like that. And then you wonder, gee whiz, are these people going to work on Monday or what's going on? So I think testing ahead of time is one of those things that is going to have to left to the individual judgment of the manager and the broker as to, and knowing the individual.
Thank you, Tom. Another follow-up question with regards to showings, I believe. Are we allowed to take the visitor's temperature before admitting them to a listing?
Well, if they let you. If you have the little thermometer and you do that, I think that would be permissible. What are you going to do if they have a temperature of 102? What are you going to do?
Right.
Are you going to say, I'm sorry, I'm not going to show you the property? Well, you better be ready to do that. If you take their temperature, you better be ready for the consequence. And, the CDC has set up guidelines as to what the acceptable range of temperature is. And I think it's, I'm guessing, okay, it's like 96 to 99, something like that. They do it in centigrade. But so what are you going to do if somebody says, well, my normal temperature is 99.9? What are you going to do with that? Put you in a real interesting position. It's one of those things you have to think through everything that you're going to do and the consequences of what's going to happen. It's like a lot of things in life. We have a lot of good ideas, but what's going to be the consequence of doing that? Do I now put myself in a position where I'm going to have to make a very, very difficult decision, or I'm going to lose a client just because of the fact that I did this? I think there are, of course, a lot of factors. If you see a client get out of a car and they're coughing and hacking, I think then that clearly you have to instruct your agents that that's a dangerous situation and stop right there, because you don't want to catch anything and spread it to other clients. So again, it's one of those things that I think you have to do. You're going to have to train them and allow them the discretion to make the individual call.
Thank you, Tom. We have another question, a follow-up question. And Tom, I believe you covered this, and I believe actually your colleague Neil covered this extensively yesterday. So the question is, the guidance not to hold open houses, what is it, by appointment or otherwise? What about directional signs? What is your opinion?
Well, if you're using directional signs, are you not holding an open house? And I think that, I know that some people may differ with me on this, but when I provide advice to brokers, before there's a problem, I want to be conservative. If the broker gets sued, I will do everything I can to, and I guess you'd say, take the broker's side that there wasn't anything done wrong. But open houses are just a real problem. They're a real problem for the neighbors too. And, I know that law enforcement has got other issues to deal with these days, but OSHA doesn't. And if someone just happens to know how to call OSHA and get somebody out there, then I think you've got an issue. And, part of that issue is going to be, when did you first meet these people? Well, I met them at the property. If you met them at the property, there probably isn't a prearranged appointment as what is contemplated. And here again is the issue of liability downstream. So I know that, there's some people who said, well, you can be creative in the way that you do this. If you meet them at the property and you have a clipboard and you write down the time that they're there and keeping track of it, it looks like it was a prearranged appointment. But if you've had signs up and all the neighbors have seen this, all the signs and everything, it's going to be a real difficult situation should there be any liability. And so again, I think there are other ways to substitute things for open houses, and that's why creative marketing people are there. They can come up with these things, because they still can contact people by cold call, by email, and any other electronic means. Except don't use, my only warning is don't use texting to do your cold calling. Okay.
Why is that, Tom?
Because that's a phone call, and it gets into the do not call issue. And as many of you know, there's federal legislation that prevents you from making business calls to people that you do not have a prior relationship with. And unfortunately, I had to help a broker who had a very creative agent who was making these text calls. And at the time we looked it up, we did the research, and it was quite clear that these texting messages are cold calls. So you can use emails to people, you can use other means to do it, but be real careful about not getting yourself in trouble on the do not call situation.
Tom, the guidelines address leaving flyers and what have you, correct? And that is not to do that at showings and when you're actually in the property. Is that correct?
Yes, and that's one of the things in the office you need to reiterate is that paper, this touching of paper is one of the things that regulatory people are concerned about. So flyers are still off the shelf, can't use those, or anything else that they're going to touch. I would also make sure your agents understand you go to a property, you don't share pens, you don't share clipboards, you don't share any kind of equipment or tools, and that the agent's the one responsible for opening all doors, cabinets, things of that nature. And you can do this, I think, in the office with a demonstration, by saying you're the client, I'm the agent, and you walk somebody through it and say, see, that's what we don't want. We don't want you touching this. I'm the one that's going to touch it. I have a glove on or whatever else. And another thing that, as I mentioned earlier, I think gloves are underrated at this point in time. There's nothing wrong giving your clients a glove to wear and still telling them not to touch, but tell them it's for their protection, so that until they can wash their hands, that they won't be touching a surface and then touching their face, because we all touch our face. It's some of us more than others. It's just a bad habit.
Thank you, Tom. We have a couple of minutes left. Would you like to give any parting thoughts to our audience?
Well, I do. My parting thought is, especially to brokers and managers, is don't forget about all the other things that you're required to do. In all of this, I think one of the biggest problems you're going to have is you're going to have people who are going to try and take advantage of the situation and won't want to come to work. Unless that's the person that you then say, I need a doctor's note that you are in fact infected with some disease that prevents you from coming to work. And if necessary, consult with your HR person or your attorney. But I think you're going to have to deal with people who are going to take advantage of this situation for whatever reason. And you got to be careful about that. I think you also need to be careful, continue to be careful in the work environment about the language that you use and things you refer to, and watch out for, getting into a bullying situation where you say something like, well, that Tiffany over there, she's just a walking COVID-19 ready to go list. You've got to be real careful about what you say about folks in the workplace. And because everybody's on a heightened, basically their tempers are short. People aren't thinking some things through before they say things. These are very tense times. And when you're training your people, I think you should remind them that these are tense times and that they need to be very careful about all these other things that they've learned in the workplace. Sorry.
Thank you. No problem. Thank you so much, Tom. We really
I'm not
appreciate
sick.
it.
I'm not sick. I'm not sick.
Thanks for the assurance, Tom. Great. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for your time. Really important information. And be sure to catch some of our other events tomorrow and later this afternoon in Orange County REALTOR Safety Week. Thank you all and stay safe.
Bye-bye, everybody.